I remember the first time I heard it. I must have been 7, maybe 8, sitting cross-legged in the dim corner of a prayer hall, the air thick with the smell of incense and old wood, listening to the elder speak. He spoke of death, of the grave, of angels that would descend into the soil where my small body one day would lie, and he said that when they came, they would not ask me about my kindness, not about whether I had shared my food with the boy down the street who had none, not about whether I had obeyed my mother, or whether I had been honest when I could have lied. No, they would ask me something else. They would lean close, open their celestial book, and in booming voices demand, "Did you wash yourself properly after urinating?" I remember the room shivering with the seriousness of that sentence, and I, too young to fully understand, looked around at the faces of grown men, beards flowing, eyes wide with fear, nodding as if this was the most profound truth. Inside me, though, another feeling rose. Confusion, amusement, almost laughter. For how could it be? The God who set the stars into motion, who painted the oceans blue and scattered galaxies across the heavens, reduced to a toilet inspector, a cosmic sanitation officer, a heavenly bureaucrat who records not the cries of orphans or the sighs of the oppressed, but the angle of my washing and the thoroughness of my hands? Even as a child, something in me whispered, "This cannot be God. This is a parody, a cartoon, a grotesque joke dressed up in holy language." And yet, I did not laugh, because everyone else was trembling, and what child dares to laugh when the adults quake? So I swallowed my question, the way children swallow stones when they are told to be silent. I bowed my head as if I too were afraid, and from that day, the absurd image was planted in me like a seed. As I grew, that seed did not die. It grew, twisting, warping my imagination of God. At night, when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I would picture it, a winged angel with a great shining book, not of wisdom, not of justice, not of mercy, but of audits. On the cover, Daily Toilet Report. Inside, endless pages of human blunders in the bathroom, catalogued with divine precision. And there I was, a trembling child, trying to remember every time I had rushed, every moment of carelessness. Was there a drop left? Did I wash long enough? Did I do it exactly as prescribed? Would one mistake condemn me forever? Imagine that. The universe, vast and infinite, stretching beyond the grasp of thought, and me, a small boy, afraid not of failing in love or kindness, but of failing in a bathroom ritual. I ask myself, is this why I was born? Is this what life is for? To play in a cosmic game of cleanliness inspections? To stand trial for accidents no one could even see? The more I imagined it, the more grotesque it became. For what does this make of God? A God so petty, so obsessed, so small, that his eternal justice is reduced to a magnifying glass over droplets of urine. A God who looks not into hearts, but into toilets. Can you feel the insult hidden in this story? It diminishes the divine. It drags the infinite down to the level of caricature. Instead of the all-wise, we are left with the all-trivial. Instead of the King of Kings, we are left with a heavenly janitor with a whip. And the most tragic thing, no one questioned it. It was repeated, believed, feared, generation after generation. Like children who were told there was a ghost beneath the bed and who grow up into adults still trembling when the lights go out. That is how fear works. It kills laughter. It silences reason. It binds the mind before it ever has a chance to stretch its wings. I tell you this now not because I enjoy mocking what once terrified me, but because the memory of it still lingers. The first time I was asked to bow to a God too small for the universe he supposedly created. And I wonder, how many of us still live under the shadow of that absurd vision? How many of us still tremble before a caricature, mistaking the whisper of fear for the voice of God? For me, the question was never about hygiene. Cleanliness has its place. No one denies that. The question was about God. And the question that haunted me was simple. If God is truly God, could he ever be so small?
I must confess something. There was a time I believed that religion was meant to sharpen our conscience, to awaken us, to make us see the difference between good and evil with greater clarity. But then I stumbled upon a teaching that shattered that hope. A teaching so strange, so absurd, that it twisted the very meaning of morality upside down. It said this: a man could live his entire life with kindness in his hands, generosity in his eyes, and honesty in his heart. And yet, if he failed to wash himself properly after relieving himself, the punishment of the grave awaited him. And another man, who robbed widows, who crushed the poor, who fattened himself on the suffering of thousands, could escape that punishment simply because his washing technique was flawless. Think of that for a moment. Close your eyes and picture it. There is a man, a simple one. He wakes at dawn to push his pedicab through the streets. His knees ache, his stomach growls, but still he smiles when he sees the children in his neighborhood. He buys them sweets with the few coins he earns. He helps an old neighbor carry water when her back gives out. He never cheats, never lies, never raises his hand in anger. This man dies quietly, his last breath a whisper of gratitude. And what does he face? The terror of the grave, not for dishonesty, not for cruelty, but for a drop of urine left unnoticed, for a hurried washing in the cold night. And another man, a governor, wealthy and powerful. He eats while others starve. He signs papers that rob entire villages of their land. His laughter echoes through the marble halls of his mansion, while outside children cough from hunger. He knows he is corrupt. He knows he is cruel. But he is careful, meticulous, precise in his bathroom rituals. And this man, according to the teaching, finds mercy in the grave. What kind of morality is this? What kind of justice rewards the tyrant for his washing and condemns the saint for his haste? It is not morality, it is mockery. It is not justice, it is parody. If this is religion, then religion has betrayed its own heart. If this is God's will, then God himself has been reduced to a petty accountant, tallying drops instead of weighing hearts. I used to think justice was clear, that we, frail humans, even in our weakness, know it instinctively. We forgive the small mistake. We overlook the accident. We focus on what truly matters, the intention, the heart, the impact of a life. If I see a man who has lived with compassion, I do not condemn him for a tiny slip. If I see a man who has harmed thousands, I do not excuse him because he polished his shoes or folded his napkin neatly. Why then would the all-merciful, the all-wise do what even I, a mere mortal, would find unjust? And so I began to ask myself, could it be that this story, repeated through centuries, has blinded us to the very essence of morality? Could it be that we have traded the shining compass of conscience for the dull weight of ritual obsession? I have seen it with my own eyes, people trembling more at the thought of a drop of urine than at the thought of lying in court. People terrified of a ritual error, yet bold in their corruption. Men who scold children for not washing properly, while they themselves steal from the treasury of the poor. This is the inversion. This is the great tragedy. The small has been made greater than the great. The trivial has been crowned king, while justice, compassion, and honesty have been thrown into the gutter. And I ask myself, is this what God wants? A heaven filled with men who passed the hygiene test, while the kind, the compassionate, the selfless are cast aside? If that is so, then I fear heaven itself would be a hell. Let me confess another thought, one that once terrified me. If the story is true, then I am more merciful than God. For I, flawed as I am, would never condemn a kind man for a small mistake. I, limited as I am, would never excuse a cruel man for perfect ritual. And if my heart recoils at such injustice, then how could the heart of all hearts demand it? This is the paradox. This is the knife that cut my faith open. Slowly, painfully, I began to see either the story is false or the God behind it is unworthy of worship. That realization broke something in me, because for so long I had been taught to accept without question, to bow, to fear, to obey, even when my soul screamed that something was wrong. But how long can one silence the voice of conscience before it withers away? How long can one worship a caricature before forgetting the face of the real God? No, I refuse. I refuse to believe that the creator of galaxies is a bathroom inspector. I refuse to accept that the fate of the soul depends more on washing technique than on kindness, honesty, and love. If that is religion, then it is not worthy of the name. If that is God, then He is smaller than the very humans He created. But if God is truly God, then He is greater than this caricature, greater than our fears, greater than our rituals, greater than our mistakes. And perhaps, just perhaps, the story was never about Him at all. Perhaps it was about us, our fear, our control, our obsession with power disguised as piety. So I stand here no longer afraid of drops, but still trembling not at rituals, but at the thought of living unjustly, unkindly, untruthfully. For in the end, it is not my washing that will matter. It is my humanity. It is my compassion. It is my truth. And that, I believe, is the only measure worthy of the divine.
I often wonder how such a small story, so absurd, so fragile, could take root in the minds of millions and grow into something so terrifying, so unquestionable. Where did it begin? Was it whispered first in a courtyard under a desert sun, or shouted from a wooden pulpit echoing across a crowd too afraid to resist? I don't know, but I can feel the soil where it grew, and that soil was fear. You see, fear is one of the oldest companions of humankind. Before we had scriptures, before we had temples, before we had science, we had fear. Fear of the dark, fear of thunder, fear of death. A child wakes in the night and the shadows move on the wall. The child does not see cloth fluttering in the wind. He sees a ghost, a monster. We laugh at the child's terror, but are we, the grown ones, any different? When we face the vast unknown of death, don't we also invent monsters? Don't we also tremble at shadows? The grave is the ultimate darkness, a place none return from, a silence so deep it swallows every song. And into that silence we pour our fears. We imagine serpents, worms, fires, punishments, endless inspections, because we cannot bear the thought of not knowing. So when someone said, "In the grave you will be punished if you do not wash properly after urinating," people listened. Not because it was logical, not because it was noble, but because fear had already softened their hearts into wax. And I imagine, perhaps long ago, there was a cleric, a man with a sensitive nose. Day after day he entered the mosque, and the air was heavy with the smell of urine. There were no tiled bathrooms, no soap, no flowing water, just sand and sweat and bodies. Maybe he grew tired of it. Maybe he was disgusted. So one day, perhaps out of frustration, perhaps even out of care, he thundered, "Those who do not clean themselves will be tortured in the grave." And the people gasped, and the children trembled, and the seed was planted. What was meant as a warning for health became a horror for eternity. What was meant as protection for the community became a weapon for the imagination. That's how fear works, isn't it? It does not ask for evidence. It does not knock politely on the door of reason. It barges in, sets fire to the curtains, and sits upon the throne of the mind. Tell a man 1,000 truths, and he may forget them tomorrow. But tell him one horror story, and it will follow him into his dreams. And so, generation after generation, the story grew. Fathers whispered it to sons. Mothers whispered it to daughters. Teachers carved it into the memories of children too young to argue. And the absurd became sacred. The trivial became terrifying. The myth became untouchable. It is easy to rule a people through fear, easier than through love, easier than through wisdom. A tyrant needs soldiers and prisons, but a storyteller of horror, he needs only words. Words that crawl into the night, words that sink into the bones, words that make the heart shiver whenever silence grows too deep. And so, this myth of the cosmic toilet inspector, of the angel with the hygiene ledger, was not just a belief, it was a leash. I ask myself, why did no one laugh? Why did no one stand up and say, "Surely God is greater than this nonsense"? The answer, I think, is because laughter is fragile before fear. Fear silences laughter. Fear silences questions. Fear silences the voice inside you that dares to whisper, "This cannot be right." And when enough people stay silent, the silence becomes tradition, and tradition becomes sacred. And soon, even to question it feels like blasphemy. I confess, I too was once ruled by this fear. I remember being a child, standing at the bathroom door at night, half asleep, rushing, clumsy. And the thought would strike me, what if I do not rush properly? What if tomorrow in the grave the angels come? And I would shiver, not from the cold water, but from the image of torment waiting under the earth. I did not fear hurting my brother. I did not fear lying to my friend. I feared the hidden drop of urine. This is how fear corrupts the compass. It turns the soul away from real justice and toward obsession with shadows. But now, when I look back, I see the pattern. Fear gave birth to the myth. The myth gave birth to control. And control gave birth to a religion of panic instead of a religion of wisdom. Is this not the saddest of ironies? That the faith meant to lift us, to free us, to make us courageous, was twisted into a machine of horror. That people who might have been bold seekers of truth became trembling inspectors of their own bodies. I do not blame the first man who shouted it. Perhaps he wanted cleanliness, perhaps he wanted discipline. But I do blame the generations who never stopped to ask, does this story reflect the God of wisdom, or only the fears of men? Does this story honor the creator of galaxies, or reduce him to a caricature obsessed with bathrooms? Because once a myth of fear takes hold, it is harder to uproot than any weed. It digs deep into the soil of culture, and soon you can't barely tell where truth ends and terror begins. That then is the birth of a fear, not in heaven, not in the heart of God, but in the trembling of human beings who could not face the mystery of death without inventing a monster to guard the gate. And I must decide even now whether I will continue to bow before that monster, or whether I will finally laugh gently at its absurdity and set my eyes once more on the true horizon of God. Because fear may give birth to myths, but only courage can give birth to truth.
You see, fear has consequences. It is not neutral. It is not innocent. Fear shapes a society, just as surely as a sculptor shapes stone. And when fear becomes the teacher, when fear becomes the pulpit, when fear becomes the very voice of religion, the fruit it bears is poisoned. I have seen it with my own eyes. Men who would tremble, who would lose sleep, not because they lied to their wives, not because they cheated their neighbors, not because they stole from the poor, but because they were uncertain whether one last drop of urine touched their clothes. Imagine that. The conscience, a divine compass, reduced to a bathroom alarm. And yet, when corruption steals the bread from the mouths of children, when rulers devour the wealth of the nation, when the strong crush the weak, the same people are silent. No trembling, no restless nights, no horror stories for that. Fear redirected, morality inverted, a people trained to obsess over the trivial while ignoring the essential. It is as if someone poured poison into the well of faith and entire generations have drunk from it. I remember, as a child, the stories told in whispers at night. Not stories of compassion, not stories of justice, but stories of punishment, of horror in the grave, the worm that never sleeps, the angel with the iron hammer, the cries of those who forgot to wash properly. And I trembled. My little chest rose and fell with terror. I thought God was a monster hiding in the bathroom. No one told me that justice was greater. No one told me that kindness was more powerful than ritual. No one told me that mercy was the true face of the divine. They gave me horror when they should have given me hope. And so a generation grew up afraid of the wrong things, afraid of drops of water, afraid of ghosts in the soil, afraid of a God who inspects toilets, but not afraid of cruelty, not afraid of greed, not afraid of silence in the face of oppression. Do you see how dangerous this is? When fear chains the mind, people stop questioning. They stop resisting. They become docile. They become manageable. A society trained to panic over the private rituals of cleanliness, but numb to injustice in public life, is a society ripe for control. And the tyrant smiles, because he knows, as long as the people are busy counting drops, they will never count the stolen coins. As long as they are terrified of the grave, they will never challenge the palace. And religion itself becomes degraded. Instead of a river of wisdom, it becomes a machine of fear. Instead of a light, it becomes a shadow. Instead of elevating the human soul, it reduces us to frightened children, forever peeking under the bed, forever whispering about monsters. And faith? Faith becomes panic institutionalized. We gather in houses of worship not to seek truth, not to open the mind, not to embrace compassion, but to shield ourselves against the horror stories that were whispered to us as children. And I ask you, is that faith? Or is that trauma wearing the mask of faith? Because true faith, authentic faith, cannot be born from terror. Terror enslaves. Faith liberates. I have met men who prayed 5 times a day, each movement precise, each ritual flawless, yet their tongues dripped with slander. I have met women who fasted with discipline, who wore every garment of modesty, yet their hearts were full of envy and cruelty. And still they slept peacefully, because they believed their toilets were in order. Meanwhile, the poor slept hungry, the orphaned cried alone, the oppressed waited in silence. But who cares for them if the religion of fear has taught us that the true measure of the soul is not compassion, but sanitation? Do you see how upside down it becomes? When the poisoned fruit of fear is eaten, justice dies, mercy dies, wisdom dies, and in their place grows a ritualism without soul, a devotion without conscience, an obedience without thought. And that is not religion. That is hypnosis. The saddest part? I too once lived in that hypnosis. I too feared the toilet more than injustice. I too felt shame not for my silence in the face of cruelty, but for my hesitation in ritual. And I ask myself even now, how did I allow them to shrink God into this? How did I allow them to turn the infinite into a cosmic inspector of bathroom habits? My heart aches when I realize the God of wisdom, the God of justice, the God of mercy has been hidden behind a mask of terror, and entire generations never saw his face. They bowed, yes. They prayed, yes. But what they bowed to was not him. It was the poisoned fruit, the fruit of fear, the fruit of distortion. And so I stand here now, not in rebellion, but in mourning. Mourning for the wasted fear. Mourning for the children who grew up trembling in the night. Mourning for a society that lost its moral compass. Because when you fear the wrong things, you love the wrong things. And when you love the wrong things, you lose yourself. That is the poisoned fruit of fear. That is what happens when horror becomes scripture, when terror becomes dogma. And if we dare not spit it out, if we dare not cleanse our palate with reason, then we will go on eating poison generation after generation until our souls themselves forget what wisdom even tastes like. This is why I cannot remain silent anymore.
When I first began to question this story of punishment for poor washing, I did not rush to reject it. No, I wanted to understand. I wanted to know where it came from, why it was told, how it could grip the minds of millions for centuries. So I went back to the old words, back to the sayings, back to the pages people recited in whispers of fear. And yes, I found it. The Hadith. A report that 2 men in the grave were punished, one for spreading slander, and the other for not cleaning himself properly after urinating. At first glance, the message is chilling. Punishment, torment, eternal consequence, all for a detail in the bathroom. But then I asked myself, what did it mean in its own time? Because every story, every law, every warning grows out of a soil called context. The soil of that time was not like ours. No porcelain toilets, no clean bathrooms tiled with marble, no endless water from pipes that hum in the wall. The people of 7th century Arabia relieved themselves in open spaces, in fields, behind rocks, in the dust. And water? Water was life. It was scarce, precious, carried in skins across deserts, rationed carefully. There was no chlorine, no sanitation system, no concept of flush. Imagine it. A crowded village, the heat of the day, the smell of sweat and animals, and then, without proper washing, drops of urine soaking into clothes, into earth, into the space where people prayed shoulder to shoulder. Disease was not a theory, it was a neighbor. Infection was not a statistic, it was the cry of a child burning with fever. So when a warning was spoken, "Be clean or you will suffer," it was wisdom, not cosmic obsession,
not heavenly trivia, but survival, health, mercy. We must remember, in that world, cleanliness was not just personal pride, it was public safety. One man's negligence could spread filth through a whole community. A careless act could poison the well, sicken the children, endanger the tribe. What today seems like a minor technicality, back then could mean the difference between life and death, between a community thriving or a community collapsing. So when a prophet, or perhaps those after him, warned of consequences for poor washing, it may have sounded like this: "Take this seriously. Do not ignore hygiene. It matters, for you, for all of us." It was, in essence, a public health campaign, a call to responsibility, a sacred way of saying, your body is not just your own, it is part of the life of the community. But here is the tragedy. What began as health advice, as compassion, as wisdom, was lifted out of its soil, stripped of its context, and carried forward as a cosmic law. The desert world faded. Toilets were invented. Pipes carried water into every home. Doctors discovered bacteria, infection, antibiotics. But the old words remained frozen, repeated without explanation, without history. And so a warning meant for survival was transformed into eternal threat. A simple piece of hygiene advice was inflated into divine punishment. The language of care became the language of fear. This is what happens when we forget context. A story that once served life becomes a story that imprisons life. A reminder of health becomes a weapon of terror. And we inherit the poisoned fruit. We tremble not at injustice, not at cruelty, not at lies, but at drops of water, invisible, imagined. Generations grow up believing God's greatest concern is the toilet, not the widow's hunger, not the orphan's tears, not the tyrant's cruelty, but the invisible stain no microscope has ever found. I began to see clearly. The problem was not the original warning. The problem was the forgetting. Forgetting the desert, forgetting the dust, forgetting the fragile wells of water, forgetting the fear of plague and infection, forgetting that these words were born from a time and place where hygiene was survival. Instead of teaching this context, the story was frozen in fear. And fear spreads faster than wisdom. Fear is easier to repeat. Fear requires no explanation. So the fear was passed down, and the wisdom was lost. To remember context is to restore wisdom. To forget it is to worship shadows. When I look at the Hadith now, I do not see a God of toilets. I see a desperate people learning to live, to survive, to protect one another. I see hygiene wrapped in sacred language so that even the poorest shepherd would take it seriously. And then I see centuries of distortion, where this wisdom was stripped from its soil and weaponized as terror. And so I ask myself, and I ask you, which God will we follow? The caricature God, obsessed with toilets, or the God of wisdom, who once clothed hygiene in sacred words to save a fragile people? If we cling to the caricature, we insult God's majesty. If we remember the context, we honor His wisdom. Context is not a luxury. Context is the difference between enlightenment and superstition, between a God who liberates and a God who terrifies. And I, for one, refuse to bow to terror. I will bow to wisdom. And wisdom begins, always, with remembering the soil in which words were first planted.
I ask myself again and again, what kind of God do I truly believe in? Is He the inspector of toilets, the accountant of hidden drops? Is He the petty judge who waits with pen poised to condemn me for forgetting what even a child forgets in haste? No. My heart cannot believe that. My reason refuses it. Because if that is God, then I know in my bones He is smaller than the mercy of a mother, smaller than the forgiveness of a friend, smaller than the patience of a teacher. And if God is smaller than love itself, then He is not God. I want to believe in a God vast as the sky, a God whose wisdom stretches beyond our narrow fears, whose justice cannot be mocked by bathroom rituals, whose mercy cannot be undone by a drop of forgetfulness. When I stand in silence, when I place my hand on my chest and feel the fragile rhythm of my own heart, I know He measures me by something deeper, not by the accidents of ritual, not by the technicalities of hygiene, but the tenderness I carry in my actions, by the compassion I offer to those who stumble beside me, by the honesty with which I live my days. Yes, cleanliness matters. Of course it does. It is health. It is dignity. It is respect for those around us. To be clean is to care, but to weaponize cleanliness into terror, to turn hygiene into a cosmic lottery of damnation, that is not divine. That is human fear dressed in sacred clothing. And I no longer wish to dress fear as faith. For too long I was chained. I remember nights when I lay awake, afraid that my hurried washing would condemn me forever, afraid that the God who breathed galaxies into being would toss me aside for a mistake that even I could forgive in a child. That fear hollowed me out. It shrank God into a tyrant of trivia, a celestial inspector crouching at the door of my bathroom. And I was left trembling, afraid of water more than of injustice, afraid of stains more than of cruelty, afraid of drops more than of daggers. But now I refuse. I refuse to believe in a God so small when my own conscience is larger. I believe in a God of balance, a God who looks at my life as a whole, not as a checklist of rituals, but as a tapestry woven of intentions, struggles, kindness, and truth. When I imagine standing before Him, I do not see Him asking me about toilets. I see him asking me about hearts. Did you love? Did you forgive? Did you stand with the oppressed? Did you feed the hungry? Did you live with courage, or did you sell your soul to fear? These, I believe, are the questions of eternity. Not the terror of droplets, but the measure of dignity. And if religion does not lead me there, if religion is reduced to panic, if it chains my soul in trembling instead of lifting it in clarity, then it is not the voice of God I am hearing. It is the echo of men, the echo of frightened men, the echo of controlling men, who learned long ago that fear is the easiest leash for the human mind. But I will not wear that leash. To accept the caricature is to insult God. It is to take the infinite and paint him as petty, to take the merciful and smear him with cruelty, to take the all-wise and confine him to absurd inspection. But to reject the caricature, that is different. To reject it is not to abandon God. It is to return to him, to return to his vastness, to his justice, to his wisdom. I whisper this to myself slowly, as though carving it into the walls of my own soul. God is not small. God is not petty. God is not the inspector of toilets. God is the ground of mercy itself. God is the source of love itself. God is the measure of justice itself. And when I hold to this, the chains of fear begin to fall. Faith, then, becomes something new, no longer a project of horror, no longer a machine of trembling, but a journey of liberation. Faith becomes the courage to live with clarity. Faith becomes the fire that burns away superstition. Faith becomes the hand that lifts another from despair. Faith becomes the voice that says, "Stand up. Do not tremble before shadows. Do not bow before petty fears. The divine is greater than this." And I know now that this is the faith I choose. Not the faith of blind fear, but the faith of enlightened courage. Not the faith of toilet inspections, but the faith of justice, of kindness, of wisdom. A religion that is nothing but fear is not faith, but panic institutionalized. But a religion that opens the heart to compassion, that sharpens the mind with reason, that steadies the hand with courage, that is faith. So I choose to believe that God will not ask me about drops of water, but about rivers of mercy. Not about forgotten rituals, but about remembered kindness. Not about hidden mistakes in the dark, but about the light I carried into the lives of others. And when I stand before him, trembling and small, I hope to hear not condemnation for trivia, but the gentle question that is larger than all fear. Did you love well? And I will answer as best I can, yes, my Lord, I tried. I stumbled, but I tried. And maybe
just maybe, that will be enough.